Ukraine is now making moves to end the war. So where is the most important region for the end of this war? As we all guess, the common red line of Ukraine and Russia is the Crimean Peninsula. Recently, Russia has been implementing purely defensive policies on the peninsula. The main reason for this, of course, is that the Ukrainians target Crimea from all directions with drones and long-range missiles, while Russia couldn't resist these attacks. Kiev's big offensive plans against Crimea expanded over time. In particular, the Storm Shadow long-range missiles sent by the United Kingdom to Ukraine further strengthened Kiev's plans for Crimea in order to cut off the Russians' connections with Crimea. The Ukrainians set their sights on the most strategic location. This is the Kerch Bridge. Russia uses the Kerch Bridge to support the invasion operation on Ukrainian territory and to connect with the city of Krasnodar on the Sea of Azov. In other words, we can liken this bridge to Russia's lifeblood in logistics and supply. In addition, the Kerch Bridge is seen as an escape point for Russian military and political officials from Crimea and residents of the region who are supporters of Moscow in case of any attack on the peninsula. For this reason, Ukraine has focused on the Kerch Bridge in order to end this war and to regain Russia's claims on the peninsula. If you remember, the last time the Ukrainians attacked this bridge was on October 8, 2022. This date was only one day after the birthday of Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Ukrainians stated that the attack was a birthday surprise for the Russian leader. But now a brand new attack has occurred on the Kerch Bridge. This striking attack had wide repercussions on the world agenda. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked the Kerch Bridge with British-made Storm Shadow long-range missiles. There is still time for Putin's birthday, but the Ukrainians have prepared a brand new gift for Putin with this attack. We think that the Russian leader seems to have received his birthday present early this year because the attack on the Kerch Bridge shook the Crimea. The pro-Russian Sergei Aksyonov in Crimea reported that air defense systems are working urgently on the peninsula. Aksyonov also added that a cruise missile had crashed near the bridge. White smoke around the Kerch Bridge was quite striking in the footage of the attack. It is claimed that this attack on the Kerch Bridge damaged Russia's 19-kilometer connection line. Although there aren't many details about this, the Russians seem to be seriously worried about this already. If the Storm Shadow missiles targeted the Kerch Bridge, that means they were launched from a distance of about 300 kilometers. If you remember last week, Ukrainian forces deployed short-range ballistic missiles near the borders of Crimea. These developments highlight the fact that the Kerch Bridge can be targeted from long distances. The attack on this bridge in Crimea pointed out that one of the most important main supply lines of the Russians was cut, as well as that Ukraine was taking much bolder moves in this regard. Ukrainian leader Zelensky announced that Russian ships cannot dictate conditions in the Black Sea and will be afraid to approach the Crimea. The president recalled the Russian missile cruiser Moskva was destroyed by Ukrainian missiles. It's not known whether these statements by Zelensky implied the attacks on the Kerch Bridge, but for the moment, the Kiev authorities prefer to remain silent about the bridge attack. Clearly, no Ukrainian official has commented on the recent attack on the Kerch Bridge. According to the reports of international intelligence sources, the Storm Shadow missile attack on the Kerch Bridge after Zelensky's statement is a sign that the Ukrainian army has started to take steps to end the war, since Russia also threatened Ukraine with navy forces. Zelensky had repeatedly shown with his statements that he would not bow to the threats of the Russians and that the Ukrainians would attack the peninsula from all directions. If you remember, an explosion occurred in Sevastopol, the main port of Russia's Black Sea Navy fleet. In the past weeks, the Russians on the peninsula were shaken by the huge explosion. This is because, although Moscow has moved part of the Russian Black Sea Fleet to the port of Novorossiysk, there are still Russian ships in Sevastopol. With these attacks of the Ukrainians on Sevastopol, the threats of the Russians to blockade the Ukrainian coastline by using their navy have actually disappeared in a way. In addition, the fact that a Russian military base in Krasnodar was attacked by air on the same dates was an indication of how sensitive the Ukrainians were to the Crimea. The targeting of the Krasnodar air base by drones also alarmed the residents of Crimea who were considering using the Kerch Bridge. The reason for this is that the residents of Crimea are now willing to leave because of the recent attacks on the peninsula, and one of the most convenient ways to escape is the Kerch Bridge. When we consider all these attacks in Crimea, we can see that the Ukrainians have started to have a much greater say in the peninsula, and they can target this critical region with UAVs or long-range missiles whenever they want. In the face of this critical situation, the only solution for the residents of Crimea seems to be to flee, considering that the war will become much more violent in time and there will be no escape route anymore. Those in Crimea do not have much time to think. So how do we know when the war is moving? If you've noticed, the tension is too high across the territory of Ukraine. The continuation of Kiev's offensive plans, especially on the southern front lines of the country, and the purpose of the Ukrainian armed forces is to build a connecting corridor extending to Crimea, seriously restricts Moscow in these regions. The increase in the offensive operations of the Ukrainians, especially in regions such as Zaporizhia, Melitopol, and Kherson, is one of the biggest factors that increases the threats against Crimea, because even though Kherson is under the control of the Ukrainians, there are Russian military groups in this region. But Ukrainian forces want to take full control of Crimea using the most strategic centers in Kherson. But the missiles that can reach from Kherson to Crimea may not be enough for Ukraine to save the peninsula in this regard. Of course, the military support of the West and the USA is very important. The United States recently announced an $800 million military aid package to Ukraine, but much more is needed than this aid. If the Ukrainians want to liberate Crimea, the West and the United States should provide the Ukrainian army with longer-range missile systems. Only in this way can Crimea be liberated. Of course, drone strikes or partisan actions may cause anxiety or evacuation on the peninsula. But if Ukraine wants a clear victory, it should also target Russian military resources on the peninsula with long-range missiles. Russia, on the other hand, seems quite helpless in this regard. Moscow authorities have focused only on defense issues so as not to lose the peninsula. Currently, we can see that the Russians are still building fortifications in the Crimea and that they are trying to create a serious defense shield in other important ports on the peninsula, especially in Sevastopol. So what are the Ukrainians doing as the Russians step up their defensive measures after the recent missile attack on the Kerch Bridge? In fact, the offensive plans of the Ukrainians continue from where they left off, in addition to regions such as Crimea, Kherson, Melitopol, and Zaporizhia. Ukrainians are also making a serious military effort near the Dnipro River. The last time the Russians lost a lot of their boats on this river, the Ukrainians, on the other hand, started to increase their repressive attacks around Dnipro after this time period, because the aim of Kiev here is to blockade Crimea from all sides. When we think about it, the Ukrainians taking control of all areas in the Dnipro River means the superiority of Kiev and Kherson. As we mentioned in Kherson, Crimea is a region that sees it from the front. Therefore, in the war diary of Ukrainians, every road actually leads to Crimea. Even clashes on the country's eastern front lines seem to have affected the situation of Ukrainian forces in Crimea. Ukrainians' willingness to take control of the eastern front lines may actually allow Kiev to focus much more on its offensive plans in Crimea. Therefore, the views of war analysts and experts on this issue are quite logical. But in order to confirm this thesis, the Ukrainians must first take control of both the eastern and southern front lines and finally make the finishing move in the Crimea. For this purpose, the Kerch Bridge was on target for the time being. So where is the next region that the Ukrainians are eyeing? In recent days, Ukraine has increased the pressure it is applying toward its ultimate aim of Crimea, which is to reduce the efficacy of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And it has also increased its efforts to disrupt the logistics network that originates from the Kerch Bridge. On Wednesday morning, the Russian cruiser was the target of the last attack in a string of assaults that took place earlier that day. A Russian Navy surveillance ship operating in the Black Sea was the victim of a devastating attack that took place just before dawn on Wednesday. On Wednesday, Moscow said that Ukraine had targeted a Russian cruiser that was patrolling waters close to the Bosphorus Strait. Russia announced on Wednesday that it had successfully defended one of its vessels from an attack by Ukraine using drones. This incident was the most recent effort at sabotage that Russia attributes to Ukraine and took place in Turkish national waters. It has come to light that one of Vladimir Putin's most cutting-edge spy vessels was ambushed in the Black Sea by 3 unmanned aerial vehicles, and new photographs of the incident are alarming. An autonomous high-speed boat can be seen in the frightening video footage that was shown on state television by the Russian Defense Ministry. The video depicts how the unmanned boat accelerates from the surface of the ocean towards Moscow's Ivan Kur's reconnaissance ship. The surveillance vessel instantly began to avoid the oncoming unmanned surface ships by performing evasive maneuvers and opening fire on them. The initial salvo fired by the Russian cruiser at the unmanned surface vehicles was unsuccessful. Just prior to being destroyed, what is believed to be a Ukrainian sea surface drone was seen avoiding fire from its intended target. The prowess of a Ukrainian sea surface drone that competed in a rodeo with a Russian cruiser garnered a lot of attention. The operators show that they are capable of handling the equipment. When it was hit, the drone went up in flames immediately. However, the drone was struck right at the peak of the wave, and as a result, it exploded into a gigantic flame just a few meters from where it was intended to land. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not disclose any details regarding the amount of damage that was sustained by the Ivan Kaz during the attack that it stated was carried out in the Black Sea by Ukrainian unmanned speedboats. However, it is not quite obvious how the surface drones and the Russian cruiser came into contact with one another or how the explosion took place based on the photographs that were given by Russia. The Kremlin was once again exposed to the power of Ukraine as a result of this attack, and it is highly likely that the Russian cruiser suffered some kind of damage as a result, because the photographs were maybe the clearest frames that have ever been captured at sea. This devastating attack startled both the administration of the Kremlin as well as Russian leader Vladimir Putin. After initial reports stated that the drones were launched from civilian ships, Russian sources suggested that the Ukrainian armed forces were responsible for the strike instead. Kiev has not yet issued a statement regarding the attack. The strike spanned a distance of around 140 kilometers and was successful in destroying all 3 drones, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. This location is 142 kilometers, 87 miles northeast of the Bosphorus. Moscow further stated that the Russian vessel was tasked with defending the pipeline infrastructure in economic waters belonging to Turkey. The claims made by Russia were not met with an immediate response from Turkey. Gas is transported by the Turk Stream from the Taman Peninsula in Russia westward along the Black Sea to a position west of the Bosphorus Strait. On the other hand, the Blue Stream travels from north to south across the eastern Black Sea and then drops approximately 700 kilometers east of the Bosphorus. Kiev did not issue a statement after the attack. Ivan Kaz was the target of an assassination attempt at the same time that smoke was seen rising from the large Crimean bridge that is controlled by Russia, sparking concerns that it was also under attack. The Ivan Kaz is a ship designed for surveillance and reconnaissance that features cutting-edge radio and visual sensors in addition to electronic warfare capabilities, and it is one of the only 2 ships in the Russian Navy that are of this sort. The ship is outfitted with a variety of radio reconnaissance and electronic warfare complexes in addition to communication equipment in order to facilitate efficient control of the fleet. The ship's primary mission was to keep an eye on the various anti-missile defense systems. As a reconnaissance ship, it is fitted with many pedestal machine gun mounts for the 14.5 mm KPV. The precise components of its equipment are unknown. However, it is known that this ship has these installations and many man-pads portable air defense systems on board. The drones and uncrewed surface ships of the Ukrainian Navy are a total of 120 sailors. The Russian military in the Black Sea is being harassed by American vessels. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles has presented Russia with a significantly more dangerous situation in the northern Black Sea. After the sinking of the Moskva on April 14, he repositioned Russian ships in the Black Sea so that they were further south. After Putin terminated Russia's participation in the grain agreement, Ukrainian UAV and U.S. strikes were specifically reported in Sevastopol at the end of October 2022 and in March 2023. An agreement to reduce the effects of Russia's boycott of Ukrainian food exports, which has become a crucial tactic in the Black Sea region, was brokered by the United Nations and Ankara. There are also rumors that suggest the reserve flagship frigate of the Admiral Grigorovich class, the Admiral Makarov, was damaged in the attack that took place in October. In spite of the fact that Ukraine's anti-ship missiles were able to significantly constrain Russia in the northern Black Sea, these missiles did not provide Ukraine with the long-range capabilities necessary to attack Moscow ships in the heart of Sevastopol. For this reason, Ukraine turned to vehicles such as the USV and the UAV. The deployment of American boats played a role in Russia's decision to reroute some of its fleet away from Sevastopol. One of the most significant changes that occurred on the water during the Russo-Ukrainian War was the introduction of unmanned surface ships and aircraft, sometimes known as drones. In this enclosed sea that is under the sovereignty of Turkey, Russia and Ukraine are engaged in a form of naval standoff with each other. It is now possible for Russian ships to be towed outside of the Sea of Azov due to changes that have occurred in the region's geography. But the Russians can only do it there. They can't replicate their success elsewhere because of the depths. The fleet that they have in the Black Sea will be able to pass through. As a result of international legislation and sanctions, the Russian Navy has found itself in a situation where it is unable to exit the Black Sea through the Bosphorus. This places them in a type of catch-22 situation. A top Ukrainian military intelligence official claims that Russia has moved the majority of its Black Sea Fleet warships from its main base in Crimea to safer waters on Russian territory. This information comes from the Ukrainian military intelligence agency, Major General Vadim Skibitsky, who serves as the deputy head of military intelligence for Ukraine. It was reported that the Kremlin had made the decision to relocate the ships out of fear of missile attacks. However, it was not possible for an independent source to confirm that the ships of the Black Sea Fleet had been relocated. The principal and formal headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet are found at Sevastopol, which is also the largest city in Crimea and has been the target of a number of drone attacks. Mikhail Rostov-Sev was nominated as governor of Sevastopol by the Kremlin in recent weeks, despite the fact that Ukraine has not admitted to being responsible for the drone strikes. According to a translation of Skabovsky's comments that was published by the online newspaper Ukrainska Pravda, he is quoted as saying that Kiev was the mastermind behind the strikes, which apparently sparked a large fire at an oil store in the area. According to Ukrainska Pravda Skibitsky, the Russian Navy High Command has reportedly moved the majority of the Black Sea Fleet ships from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, which is located in Russia. It is clear that the Russians are living in constant terror. At the moment, Sevastopol's other military stations, in addition to this one, are under intense surveillance. The invaders are preparing their positions to defend against assaults on this infrastructure by equipping themselves with defensive mechanisms. Skibitsky mentioned that the battleships had been relocated to Novara, which is located in Sisek and is around 340 kilometers from Sevastopol. He gave a description of Novorossiysk, which is situated in the southern Kuban area of Russia on the eastern coast of the Black Sea. It is probable that Russian strategists expected that if the Ukrainian offensive enabled positioning closer to Russia's naval facilities, the ships may come into range of missiles such as those from Mars. This prediction would have been made well outside the possible anti-ship missile launch zones in the area that is controlled by the Ukrainians. Some knowledgeable individuals assert that Vladimir Putin's potential naval campaign in the Black Sea was doomed to fail even before the sinking of the flagship Moscow in April 2022. Since the commencement of the war, at least 18 ships and boats belonging to the Black Sea fleets have been completely sunk or suffered severe damage. This constitutes more than 20% of the pre-war combat power, which was comprised of 74 ships and boats. The Black Sea Fleet consisted of 800 ships in 1990, to 74 of which were combat vessels. However, after that year, the number of ships in the fleet began a steep fall. There were to 75 ships and boats in total in the Russian Navy when the conflict with Ukraine first broke out. Only 58 of them participated in the battle. Therefore, there were just 1/5 as many battleships as there were during Soviet times. The number of people on board the ship as a whole was cut by a factor of 3. As evidence that Ukraine possessed the capability to strike the Russian Navy by February 2022, the Black Sea Fleet had 74 combat units at the end of that month when combined with the fleet's patrol boats. He gave several instances, one of which was the Ukrainian offensive that took place in April 2022 and culminated in the destruction of the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet in Moscow. At the very least, in certain regards, Russia's Black Sea Fleet was diminished to the status of a coastal power. This development includes lessons for U.S. planners. However, Moscow's primary objective of combating enemy ships was not well adapted to this war, and the elimination of its air defense capabilities was not as significant of a strategic loss for Russia as it might have been. It meant that the Russian Black Sea Fleet had to give up its principal air defense platform as a result. Following the sinking of the Moskva, the fleet was unable to operate along the coast of Ukraine in a secure manner. The loss of the Moskva brought attention to the Black Sea Fleet that was operated by Russia.